study of the American presidency at Hofstra. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today for our what is going to be a most instructive and engaging discussion getting close to electing Madam President. I'm going to introduce our speaker, and I'll be quick so that we can turn it over to hear this most timely lecture and have time for discussion. I want to just give a few words of thanks. It is so exciting to see everyone in person again. Having a lecture together is just so much better than Zoom in my view. And special thanks to the classes that have taken the time to join us today. My American Politics class, Dr. Feldman's American Politics class, Professor Schneerman's State and Local Politics class, and I know we have many other students and community members joining us as well. It's wonderful to have you here. Thanks to the Hofstra Cultural Center and our Pride Productions team for recording this event, making everything possible. Special thanks to Carol Mallison, who's in the back, Janine Rinaldi, and Athleen Collins for everything to put this event together so smoothly. Thank you. I'm going to begin with just a small personal story because I know our speaker, Dr. Nicola Gutgold, very well. We met at a nonpartisan seminar in the summer of 2016 in Philadelphia before the Democratic National Convention. The organization that was hosting the seminar ran one at the Republican Convention as well. We were both at the Democratic seminar. Now, that was interesting and exciting in and of itself. The first week of the seminar, these are 2-week events that run a week of lectures with scholars, journalists, elected officials, and then the second week is the convention, and students who participate get to do internships, field work during the conventions. Well, the summer of 2016, that week of July, stood out for a number of reasons, but particularly for Hofstra, because on the Tuesday of that week, we learned from the news that Hofstra would be hosting the first presidential debate on September 26th, 2016. So I had just run an event. I had gone out for lunch with the speaker, came back and thought, okay, now I finally have time to prep for tomorrow. And I see a message, don't speak to the media until the official announcement is out. I thought, oh, what could that be? And then I realized, well, indeed, we had been, the school that had originally planned to host the debate wasn't able to do so, and Hofstra was going to put together a debate in less than 10 weeks. And my heart I just lost a breath as I thought about everything that would need to be required here. And I went to one of the afternoon sessions, and I saw Dr. Gutgold, and her reaction, because at that point the news was out, this is amazing. How exciting that your school is hosting this debate. It's going to be fantastic. And I thought, that's the energy that I need. And so that is, from then, that is how we developed our friendship, professional work together. We've known each other actually even before that. But I just wanted to say that energy and enthusiasm for politics and public life and engagement in public discourse defines, to me, Dr. Gutgold's approach to teaching and scholarship, and it is such a great pleasure to welcome you here today. Now, Dr. Gutgold is a professor of communications arts and sciences at Penn State Lehigh Valley. She has published so many works on the rhetoric of women in non-traditional fields. One of her books came out in 2006, Paving the Way for Madam President. An updated version came out in 2017, still paving the way for Madam President. And then, of course, the book that will be the large focus of the discussion today, Electing Madam Vice President, When Women Run, Women Win. She has also written numerous other works, Women in the Academy, Learning from Diverse Career Pathways, The Rhetoric of Supreme Court Women, From Obstacles to Options, Seen and Heard, The Women of Television News. She's also co-authored text, Gender in the American Presidency, 9 Presidential Women and the Barriers They Faced. Dr. Gutgold has also written a children's book with a former student of hers, Madam President, 5 Women Who Paved the Way. She is quoted frequently in national and international media. She has been a visiting professor at California State University, Chico, and the University of Zagreb in Croatia. She has taught in China and in Germany, and she has won numerous awards for her teaching and research, including most recently the 2018 Penn State Alumni Fellow Teaching Award, the Lehigh Valley Women of Influence Award, the 2016 Teaching Fellow Award from Penn State's University College, and an Alumni Achievement Award for professional experience from her undergraduate alma mater, King's College. She has taken students to places as diverse as Philadelphia, DC, China, India, Europe, and Peru. I could keep speaking, and I think I just moved your slide, sorry about that. But I think I will turn the floor over. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Nicola Guthart. Sorry about the slide.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bose. What your executive dean is too modest to tell you is that I really met her for the first time when her alma mater, Penn State's Schreier Honors College, honored her with a very prestigious award. So I am humbled and honored to be here because of the gracious hospitality of Dr. Mina Bose. So thank you very much for having me. I am very excited to share this work with you today, and I'll get started. Are we getting closer to electing Madam President? Show of hands, how many of you think so? Okay, not bad, not bad. I don't know, I'd say maybe 40% I see. When we study feminism and the strides that women have made toward equality, third wave feminism encourages women to know themselves and to seek out other women's stories, to understand other women's experiences. And my talk today is based on the book, When Women Run, Women Win, Electing Madam Vice President. And it is an extension of my research that is motivated by women's stories. So when we begin to understand each woman's unique experience, we gain a greater understanding of the obstacles that she faced. And so as we learn about women who have run for the United States presidency, I'd like you to keep in mind who she is, where she comes from, what motivates her to be a political candidate, and what makes her want to run for the highest office in the country. But we can't begin with 2020. It just wouldn't be fair, because women have been running for the United States presidency for many years, even before 1964, but that is where we're going to start. And we're going to start with 1964 and the woman that you see on the screen. And my first question for you is a show of hands. How many people here have ever heard of the woman you see there, Margaret Chase Smith? Hey, I see just a few hands. And that's why I believe it is so important to be reminded of women who have blazed this trail long before we had 6 women in the 2020 election. And by the way, if you didn't know who this woman is, don't feel badly. In fact, many of these women have often been left off history book pages and forgotten about. And even when people know that they've run for president, they often don't receive the credit that they have done so, because their bids for the presidency are often framed as symbolic gestures. And so I want you to keep that in mind, and also ask yourself, as we're talking this afternoon, what is a symbolic gesture? Have you ever made a symbolic gesture? Or do you think that's a good characterization? So we'll go back again for a moment and spend just a minute talking about who this incredible woman in front of you was. Margaret Chase Smith was a woman from a town called Skowhegan, Maine. And it's a small town, and she received her high school diploma. And for her, that was enough, because education wasn't really her thing. She wasn't into it. And besides, back then when she got her high school diploma, women really were not expected to go beyond that. But nonetheless, this high school diploma provided her with an opportunity to become a rural school teacher. And if she didn't like school, she didn't like being a rural school teacher 10 times more than she didn't like school itself. But she had an added advantage, and that is she was a basketball player in high school and a really good one. And this rural school wanted someone who could also motivate the young women who went there to be more athletic and to play sports. Well, she didn't last very long in that job. In fact, she kind of quit even before the school term was out. And she went back to her hometown of Skowhegan, and she got a job as a telephone operator. And at the time, if you were a telephone operator, guess what? You were able to listen to the conversations of people in your community. It was kind of like a very in position, and it was kind of a tough job to get. She loved the job of telephone operator. And at one time, a very handsome-sounding man was on the other line, and it happened to be Clyde Smith, and he was a congressman. And they formed a relationship, got married, and she became the congressman's not only wife, but political confidant and insider. She would help him navigate. I'm thinking a little bit of a precursor to Nancy Reagan, where she would sort of guide Clyde Smith on what he should be doing to lead the district that he represented in the Skowhegan area. Well, he died very suddenly, and just like so many women in politics at the time, she got in over his dead body, literally. Rest in peace, Clyde Smith. But that ushered in Margaret Chase Smith's political career. So no sooner did she finish out his term as a congresswoman, she then liked the job, won re-election, and eventually ran for the Senate and was elected. And she was the only woman in the United States Senate. And her most famous moment came when she had more courage than all of her male colleagues who wished they could speak out against McCarthyism. And she gave a very famous speech called the Declaration of Conscience. And a little fun fact is that when Elizabeth Dole, who we'll talk about in just a minute, wanted to pursue a broader political career, she consulted the only woman who had such a thing, and that was Margaret Chase Smith. The next woman I want to talk about is probably more widely known because she's a fellow New Yorker. And I already see some nodding heads. This is Shirley Chisholm, affectionately known as Ms. Chiz. She ran for Congress, and she grew up both in Barbados and in Brooklyn. And she graduated with a degree in teaching from Brooklyn College, and she received a lot of sexism when she graduated because she was a very tiny woman, and a lot of schools just didn't want to hire her because they didn't think she could handle a classroom because she was just such a small, physically small person. But not only did she handle her classrooms especially well, she earned her master's degree, and she became a very effective educational leader in Brooklyn. But some people in town started to notice in her a public speaking style that they thought was very commanding. Despite having a very heavy lisp, when she spoke, people really listened to her. She had a fiery kind of rhetoric. And when I look at the way she spoke, it was not unlike the rhetoric of Bernie Sanders. You know, she would say, "We're going to have a revolution. We've got to start a revolution." And she put her fist in the air. And she became a very popular and well-known congresswoman. She was outspoken at a time when not only weren't women elected to office very frequently, but if they were elected, they weren't expected to speak out. And I actually consulted my own congresswoman about this situation. When Shirley Chisholm became a congresswoman, she was given the agricultural committee. She was assigned to the agricultural committee. And she took one look at that and she thought, this just is not right. I'm from Brooklyn, and while there is a very famous book, one of my favorites, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, she said she does not want to be part of the agricultural committee. So she asked for a committee change. And that just wasn't heard of. And in another instance, she entered a room and there was no chair for her. So she went out into the hallway and she carried in a fairly heavy chair and just joined the conversation and brought her chair to the table. And those kinds of things are typical for Shirley Chisholm. She ran for president in 1972. And she crisscrossed the country. I'm sure if she could have come to Hofstra, she would have, because she loved speaking to school, to education, to the issue of education, and to any kind of student who was in college. That was her thing. And in fact, I have a colleague at Penn State Lehigh Valley who was at University of California at Los Angeles, and she said that she remembers being invited to a talk by Shirley Chisholm. But Shirley Chisholm had one big observation after running for president of the United States, and she said that people are more sexist than racist. And she thought that we would elect an African-American president before we would elect a woman president. And when Barack Obama became president of the United States, he actually gave a big shout out to Shirley Chisholm, who he felt in many ways paved the way for his presidency to become a reality. Now, there's Shirley Chisholm and Pat Schroeder talking, and you see how animated Shirley Chisholm is. That was a kind of a typical way of her being. Pat Schroeder was a Colorado congresswoman who served 23 years in the House of Representatives from what she describes as Marlboro country. And she was well known for having a very silvery tongue. She's the one who coined the phrase the Teflon president when describing Ronald Reagan. And she was never supposed to run for president, but she was working for Gary Hart. And maybe some of you caught a fairly recent movie called The Frontrunner, starring Hugh Jackman as Gary Hart. Gary Hart was supposed to be president of the United States, but he was found with a woman, not his wife, as they like to say, and that was the end of his presidential aspirations. So her staff was encouraging her, run, Pat, run, run, Pat, run. She never even made an announcement speech, but she ran for president. She withdrew not long after she started. I don't even think it was a one-year bid. But when she stepped away, she cried a little because she felt very emotional about her family and friends who helped her make that very big bid for the presidency. And not unlike any of us would feel a little emotional and very, very grateful for the people around us. She shed a few tears, but that became the frame with which her presidential bid was remembered for many people. And the shortcut was, that's why we can't elect women president of the United States, because they're way too emotional and they're going to just be crying all the time. This is, for me, the woman who started a lot of my research, because in 1996, I was still a PhD student at Penn State University, and I was searching for a dissertation topic. And my dissertation director, Dr. Richard Gregg, says, well, I want you to think about what you're interested in. You know, you seem to like politics. Maybe you want to think about a political person to write about. He was very interested in political communication. So I was hunkered down in my family room with my then 1-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son, and we were, watching the GOP convention like all families do, right? And I see this woman descend the podium at the convention in this sleek, mustard-colored silk suit, engagingly waltzing around the crowd, very much like a Southern belle at a cocktail party, telling stories, very engaging wife-centered stories about her husband, Bob Dole, then the Republican nominee for president. And I had never seen any kind of public speech like that. And at the time, I had been teaching public speaking about 10 years. And so I was very, very interested in public rhetoric. And I expected her to stand behind a podium, much like I'm doing now, and kind of stiffly say, my husband would make a great president, like we see at conventions most of the time. Or the child who never expects to be in political life saying, my dad would be great, that kind of thing where you can tell they're reading from a teleprompter. Unlike that, Elizabeth Dole seemed to be on fire in that audience. She seemed to have that audience in the palm of her hand. Some described it like Oprah Winfrey. And all the news stations after she finished, well, the big three and certainly CNN said, wow, Dan Rather, then an anchor of the CBS News said, what we've seen here is political history tonight, folks. He was so taken with her speech. And of course, a lot of the questions that came out of that speech was, why isn't she the candidate? Having interviewed both Bob and Elizabeth Dole a number of times, Bob Dole would tell you if he were here now, he's a thriving 90-some-year-old man, still living in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Elizabeth Dole, who's well into her 80s now. He would tell you that she's the public speaker in the family, and that every speech he ever gave on the Senate was the first time he ever read the remarks, and he's not very good. He would tell you that, because that's what he says. He said, but Elizabeth, she's a pro, and she practices her speeches, and she puts a lot of time into it. And in fact, the speechwriter who helped her with that speech was sitting in the front row of the convention hall, and he noticed that she had the whole speech on the teleprompter, but because she was walking throughout the convention hall, she had no notes, but never missed one word or one beat because she was so well prepared. When she ran for president, a 9-month exploratory bid in 1999, she adopted much that same Southern style of inclusive storytelling. And while I observed that that works especially well, it certainly worked well for another Southern politician, Bill Clinton, it did not work as well for Elizabeth Dole. And I believe the reason falls on gender lines. The idea that a woman cannot be that warm and courtly and still be perceived as powerful versus a male candidate. Another woman who made a bid for the presidency, this time in 2004, was a one-term Senator, Carol Mosley Braun, who rose to Senate power on the heels of Anita Hill's accusations against then Republican conservative Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas, who she alleged sexually harassed her. And 1992 was dubbed the Year of the Woman. We've heard that again after that. She ran for the Senate in Illinois. She had been the Cook County Recorder of Deeds, and she won a Senate seat. And then in 2004, she decided to make a bid for the nomination for the Democratic nomination for president. Her bid was not very successful. A lot of her campaign media talked about questioning her campaign for financial wrongdoing. She was also the only woman. And that is a distinction I want to make, that, you know, there was a time when there was just one woman in the campaign. And so all eyes would be on that one woman running for president. And she looked very much like a novelty because there was no competition for her. You know, she was the only woman, and she seemed like a long shot because, well, she was the only one. But in 2008 and in 2016, Hillary Clinton made a bid for the presidency, and you see Elizabeth Warren behind her when she was campaigning with Hillary Clinton. And 2008 marked the first time in presidential history that we had a woman who was not framed by the media as symbolic. Previous to that, every other woman, including Elizabeth Dole, who was sometimes described as, quote, the first viable candidate, still had the the tone of a person who's just going through the motions. And certainly because she only lasted 9 months in the race, there was a sense that she wasn't really competitive. So as I said before, these are 3 other women who have over the years made a bid for the presidency: Carly Fiorina, Jill Stein, and Michelle Bachmann. And usually when women would make a bid for the presidency, as I said before, there were just no other women running. And so, you know, something about their bid made it seem unusual and unlikely to succeed. You know, if I failed to mention the vice presidential women, I would be remiss. So I want to take a moment to say that in the United States, there have been 3 times when women have been on the national ticket as vice presidential candidates, and we see 2 of them here. We see Geraldine Ferraro in 1984, and we see Sarah Palin in 2008. And a political scientist, Dr. Joe Freeman, wrote a book many years ago now called One Room at a Time. And she argued in her book that that's how women in the United States will eventually gain parity in political power, and that is slowly, incrementally. And in a book I co-authored in 2009 with Diana Carlin and Ted Shekels, we looked at 9 women who, from their resumes, would be presidential material. Everyone from Christine Gregoire, who was governor of Hawaii, to, I have the book right here, Olympia Snow. I'm trying to think. while now. Olympia Snowe, Nancy Pelosi, who's often in the news, Barbara Mikulski, Dianne Feinstein, and Nancy Kassebaum from Kansas. And what we noticed is that every single woman that we wrote about was often cast as the vice president, even if she had the credentials that all the people running for president had who were male. And so it made me think that an entree to the presidency would be the vice presidency, that may be the way we elect a woman president, to be determined, right? So the work that I do is rhetoric, and rhetoric is an invitation to see the world through the rhetor's eyes, designed to generate understanding among individuals with differing perspectives. And when we examine these women's presidential experiences, I think we begin to see the world of presidential politics through their eyes. So I invite you to come on that journey with me to imagine what these women who ran for president in 2020 saw as they attempted to become the leader of the free world. Now, the good news is this. In 2020, we had the largest pool of presidential candidates in the history of the United States. We had 30 people running for president. And I want to mention the names of the people who ran for president in 2020. We had, of course, Joe Biden. We had Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bloomberg, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Tom Steyer, Deval Patrick, Michael Bennett, Andrew Yang, John Delaney, Cory Booker, Marianne Williamson, Julian Castro, Kamala Harris, Steve Bullock, Joe Sestak, Wayne Messam, Beto O'Rourke, Tim Ryan, Bill de Blasio, Kirsten Gillibrand, Seth Moulton, Jay Inslee, John Hickenlooper, Mike Gravel, Eric Swalwell, and Richard Ojeda. Whew! And we had 6 that were women. So guess what? Somewhere in between 20 and 30%. Being an optimist, I would say, let's go with 20. And something called critical mass is attained, and suddenly women's voices are heard. So the optimistic me wants to say, let's call 2020 a critical mass campaign for women. And that's been a long time coming because we never had it before. So since the beginning of women running for president, we never achieved that goal of critical mass. So more women than ever ran for president of the United States in 2020. And something Dr. Bose and I were able to see with our own eyes during the inauguration was the day after the inauguration. Anyone else here experience that? Was anyone else in Washington? There you go, yeah. Where we had the incredible Me Too movement and the Women's March. And your esteemed political science professors could tell you better than I am, politics is reactive. And we often vote because of something. And I would argue that we voted because we were upset. Women were upset. And women came out to run for president because they were upset about the political climate. So I wrote a little poem. It's not very good. Even though I was an English major, I probably wouldn't win any prizes for poetry, but I thought it was cute. 6 women were in the race. The first presidential debate was a total disgrace. What would be this country's ace? A president with a woman's face. And I felt that was true because I couldn't believe how coarse the rhetoric had become. I'm personally conservative, and I was embarrassed by the topics that were discussed by people that would, one of them was going to lead the country. And I was embarrassed at the low level of talk. And in my experience writing about women in politics, I feel like the talk is not low with women candidates. It's more geared to the problems of people. And maybe it's because so often women experience those problems firsthand. Having come through my own career as a young mother, struggling to figure out daycare needs and time management and financial issues, I sometimes think that we're just more worried. And maybe that's a feminine centric view, so you can set me straight. But also the tenor of women who run for president seems to be more concerned with those issues. And this is the first woman I want to talk about. Her name is Tulsi Gabbard. And Tulsi is an Army veteran. She served 2 tours of duty. And she comes from, as you might guess, just from taking one look at her, if you don't remember her from the presidential race, she comes from Hawaii. One of the other observations I have about women in presidential politics is that that not just women in presidential politics is that politics is geographical. And I'm from Pennsylvania, and I was talking with Dr. Bose on our way in, and I said, Joe Biden and Jill Biden are hugely identifiable for me because I'm from Pennsylvania. It's my home state. I was born and raised there. And when I read Jill Biden's autobiography, Where the Light Enters, I felt like I knew her. I live in Wawa country, and I felt like this woman who, dreamed of marrying her prince and having a very close family was someone that I could identify with. And Tulsi Gabbard is a woman who's thoroughly Hawaiian. She liked very much in her speeches to teach about what aloha means. For me, I thought it meant hello and goodbye, but she in her speeches taught me that it's not just that. And she would say things like, aloha, thank you so much. Growing up here in Hawaii, I loved swimming, surfing, and having fun in this paradise I'm lucky to call home. But I gradually realized that I was actually happiest when I was doing things for other people, things to protect our water, our oceans, and our beaches. And she would often talk about the definition of aloha. She would say, now a lot of people know aloha is a word that means hello or goodbye, right? Because this is how we greet each other in Hawaii. But there's a reason why we start our conversations and our gatherings with this word aloha, because there's so much power in what it actually means. And she goes on to say that it means love, it means a way of being. But she wasn't only about Hawaii in her rhetoric. She talked a lot about her military service. And she would draw on her ethos as a soldier. She called out Democratic rival Kamala Harris early in the primary season and said, quote, Harris is not qualified to serve as commander of chief, saying, I can say this from a personal perspective as a soldier. And she said, quote, the president's most important responsibility is serving as commander-in-chief, and I will do so as a soldier who understands the seriousness of this responsibility. Now, in the fall of 2019, you might remember that that Hillary Clinton appeared on a podcast hosted by David Plouffe, President Barack Obama's campaign manager in 2008, and she opined that Gabbard was being groomed by Moscow to run as a third-party spoiler candidate in 2020 to help President Trump win re-election. And Tulsi Gabbard wasted no time in blasting the former Secretary of State and calling her a, quote, queen of the warmongers. She was a very polished presidential candidate. She had several distinct characteristics. She would use the active voice, even confrontational word choice. She did not shy away from that. She was unafraid to take on more experienced politicians by citing specific ways that they have not demonstrated leadership, as she did with both Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. And we had a student in the class section today who was a very big supporter of Kamala Harris. Are you here now? Did you come back? No, okay. And he said that he felt she was dissed by the more experienced candidates in the race that they kind of dismissed her and her campaign. And we both opined a little about how maybe also being from a non-contiguous state made her look like an odd candidate. Not sure about that, but she is the first female combat veteran ever to run for the presidency, and she's not easily stereotyped. You know, she's a peace-loving war veteran, and another media frame that I talked about is that she was a favorite of the Russians. Can we believe that? I don't think so, but she said she's not running for Congress again, but I would be very surprised if she's not back in some way as a political candidate, even though she struggled to make any significant gains in the 2020 election. She was the last woman to bow out of that race. She held on as long as she could. So now let's turn our attention to Elizabeth Warren, who is a much better known figure nationally in politics. Elizabeth Warren is such an interesting public figure, in my opinion. We look at the age difference between Gabbard and Warren and their life experiences being very different. Warren is in her 70s now and was the oldest of the women who ran for president of the United States. And she actually was a very smart student in high school, not surprising. She was a star debater in her high school. And then she went on to be a debater in the debate club at American University, where she was actually recruited on a full scholarship for her debate skills. But 2 years into her college career, her high school boyfriend asked her to marry him. So she dropped out of college and moved back to Oklahoma and married him. He was a very successful engineer who traveled for his work, and eventually they ended up in New Jersey, and she got a law degree and went to work as a law professor. And she became an internationally recognized expert on economic policy, especially as it relates to the middle class. And she has co-authored and authored a number of very good books on getting your finances straight, some with her daughter, who's also an economist. And she rose to national attention when Barack Obama appointed him to a position to examine the bank regulations. And she turned from a professor to a politician. And this would be a very typical thing for her to say. Washington works great for the wealthy and the well-connected, but it isn't working for anyone else. And when she was on the debate stage and Michael Bloomberg was there, she was a very deft debater. You can tell her roots as a debater because she said, I don't think we need another billionaire in Washington. So she alternated her speeches between two main topics: her biography as a scrappy Midwestern woman who transcended the norms that most women of her time did to follow a different path. She also made a difference for middle-class Americans that were increasingly squeezed out of a middle-class existence with high interest rates and unaffordable college education. The later things, the things about economics, she culled not only from her own experiences growing up when her father lost his job. It was a well-worn story she told on the campaign trail, and she noticed her mother putting on her church dress and realized that her mother was going to Sears to get a minimum wage job that at the time could continue to support the family so they didn't lose their house. And she said that's no longer possible. If one wage earner loses their job, there's no way that the other partner can go out and get a minimum wage job and yet support the family, because the cost of things have gotten way out of whack. So she would do two things in her stump speeches. She would tell illustrative stories and reveal parts of her biography, and she tied her life and her stories to the problems facing the middle class. Her campaign started on fire. She appeared on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. She raised a lot of money, $19.1 million in the second quarter. She was way ahead of her progressive rival, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. She was clearly a front runner. At her campaigns, she would have sometimes 4-hour selfie lines. after a 1-hour talk, people would line up to take a selfie with her, sometimes waiting as long as 4 hours because people were starting to be convinced that this is the next woman who's going to be running our country. She would give little girls what she called pinky promises, that she was going to be a good president and pave the way for them to become president of the United States. But something went completely wrong at a point in her campaign, so wrong that she didn't even win her home state of Massachusetts. And, you know, she electrified her audiences, but it totally fell apart in a surprisingly fast way. And she was easily the most prepared candidate. She garnered a lot of attention early in the 2020 primary race for her well-researched and written plans, but I wrote this. Today's political climate does not seem to reward the most intellectual, carefully coordinated candidate. In addition, her political leanings may have been too far left for the majority of voters who eventually nominated a moderate white man, Joe Biden, of course, who had been in the United States politics for more than 40 years. But Elizabeth Warren had a hard time immediately endorsing Joe Biden. She took a minute after a very painful concession that she was leaving the race in front of her home in Cambridge with her husband, Bruce. And she then came out and did endorse Joe Biden, but I don't see her very often in public life. Of course, I'm not a big cable watcher, but I haven't seen much of her in the news, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just me, but she's not someone who I see a lot now. But she did start out very strong, and I actually, the same young woman who wrote that children's book with me, her sister was on the campaign for Elizabeth Warren. They're both two really exceptionally bright young women and very politically active. And she said it was so heartbreaking that everyone just left the campaign and went home after she dropped out of the race, and of course, just very disappointed. Another woman I'd like to talk about is also a New Yorker, like Shirley Chisholm. This is Kirsten Gillibrand, and I'm sure you know who she is. I mean, many of you probably do, because when Hillary Clinton was promoted to Secretary of State, nominated and became Secretary of State, Barack Obama named Kirsten Gillibrand, New York put Kirsten Gillibrand in place to become the senator, to fulfill the rest of her term. And Kirsten Gillibrand comes from a very politically motivated female lineage. Her grandmother, Polly Noonan, was a fixture in Albany politics and someone that Gillibrand refers to often as the person who got her fired up about politics, made her want to be a political woman. And Kirsten Gillibrand had a lot of advantages early in her life. She went to a very prestigious public school or a private school and got to travel the world. And she spent time in China as a student and started working at a fancy New York legal firm where she was making tons of money, but she looked at herself one day and said, I absolutely hate my job. And so she started to think about what would fire her up, what would make her highly motivated, and she thought of one person. Having been very interested in China, she had seen when Hillary Clinton gave possibly the most famous speech of her career as a first lady in China, in Beijing, China, in the 1990s. And she said, women's rights are human rights. And Kirsten Gillibrand thought, I think I could get behind a woman who believes that women's rights are human rights. So she started to attend a lot of Hillary Clinton fundraisers, and she did the thing that women absolutely have to do to get motivated in politics. She donated money. And Hillary Clinton took her on a little bit as her protege. And she then became politically active, first in the Congress and then in the Senate, and then made a bid for the presidency. I mean, I'm giving you a very short story. But her presidential campaign, of all the women I'm talking about, surprisingly, was the least impactful. It started out incredibly promising. She stood in front of the Trump Tower in New York City, and she called the Trump building a shrine to greed, division, and vanity. And she said, our president is a coward. The wind was blowing, and red, white, and blue U.S. flag was her backdrop. She argued, Trump wants you to believe he is strong, but he is not. We deserve a president who is brave. She declared, building upon her slogan that brave wins, which was also the name of a children's book she co-wrote, Bold and Brave. Unfortunately, her presidential campaign did not have a lot of staying power. It's a little bit parlor games to ask why not. But I do think that one of the reasons is that even though she was very well qualified and extremely well educated, she was known also as the Me Too senator. And I think part of that was not a positive thing for her. Despite her great support of Hillary Clinton, she believed when Bill Clinton got involved with Monica Lewinsky and spoke out publicly that he should have left the office of the presidency. He should have resigned. And she also believed that Al Franken, who left the Senate in shame for marginalizing a woman with photographs that were inappropriate, that was absolutely the right thing. She made no apologies about that. And I think that did not win her a lot of support within the Democratic Party. So that was the campaign of Kirsten Gillibrand. She was, as I say, she was the first woman that bowed out. Now, this woman needs no introduction. I'm sure everyone here has heard of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is our current Vice President of the United States. And I think we can all safely say, and if I'm wrong, I want anyone to just say, no, you're wrong about that. And I would be like, then okay, I agree with you because you will know more than I do about this. But I absolutely think that Kamala Harris is the Vice President of the United States because she was a presidential candidate. I think it would be very hard to believe that Joe Biden would have chosen her if she didn't elevate her public persona nationally through her bid for the presidency. And her big moment of the presidential race that she ran, which, by the way, wasn't very successful. She wasn't a very successful presidential candidate, was when she challenged Joe Biden in a debate. Harris stood out as one of the top performers in the primary debate, garnering headlines for taking former vice president to task over his history of opposing federal busing. And I think I have a little line here from that. I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden. I do not believe you are a racist. I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground, but I also believe it's personal. It was actually hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. It was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. There was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. She was bused to school every day. That little girl was me. And you could buy a t-shirt with that on it because it went viral, as they say in this political climate. And I do think that that's a lesson, I think, for any presidential candidate. And the lesson is find a way to make news in a way that will elevate your campaign. And for her, that was her moment. And Kirsten Gillibrand tried to do it with an old op-ed that Biden had authored about working women. It failed. And it was, kind of a blatant attempt to try to gain attention because when you have a large primary field, as we did, it's very, very hard to be noticed. But this is what Kamala Harris did, and it worked because we noticed her. And she got a slight bump in the polls. But more than that, I think that after the killing of George Floyd and Joe Biden had promised if he won the nomination, he would choose a woman. Harris became a really attractive option for him. She came from California, so opposite side of the country, and she could add a lot of charisma. I think she is a charismatic campaigner and speaker. I write that she's a notably articulate and effective speaker with a comfortable conversation style. I say that, again, politics is geographical, right? She comes from California, so she'll begin a speech with like, hey, Oakland. Now, as someone who teaches public speaking, I might say to my student, don't hey me at the beginning of your speech. I would not do that to Madam Vice President. I would definitely respect her position. But that's her geographic sensibility. You know, it matches her Chuck's sneakers that she wears. She's California cool. And she did bring that to her campaign. And maybe, just maybe, because our president is a man of a certain age, having that younger kind of cool spirit, even though she's exactly the age as I am, but she's a much hipper kind of speaker than I am, I think gave his campaign a bit of verve. So these are the kinds of things I think people look for. So during her campaign, give you a little idea of the kind of spirit she brought to the stage. She would often run out onto the stage wearing her sneakers, sometimes blue jeans with her jacket, to the song My Shot from Broadway show Hamilton. And the lyrics capture her competitive spirit. I won't sing it, but I'm not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. So, you know, she did lose initial momentum, and she did have a couple of different slogans. It was Kamala Harris for the people, and then it was a direct, repudiation of Trump, something like a dude's gotta go. I think that was it. So, you know, again, not consistent themes, but definitely a compelling figure. And anyone who has studied Joe Biden and his family knows how important family is to the Bidens. And the fact that Harris knew Joe Biden's deceased son, Beau, who died at age 48 of brain cancer, seemed to be the final flourish in her selection. They were both attorney generals together, he from Delaware, she from California. So some of the media frames that followed Harris were that she was not authentically progressive, American, or, quote, Black enough. Another woman that made a significant impact on this campaign is a Midwestern senator from Minnesota named Amy Klobuchar. How many people have heard of Amy Klobuchar? Yeah, I think she's well known. And to my experience, I felt like she had a very successful campaign of all the women. She lasted pretty long. She dropped out right as Joe Biden was ascending and said, I'm dropping out and I'm endorsing him. She asked not to be selected for the vice president, asking him instead to choose a woman of color. But she's a winning senator. She has won every race that she ran, and she has passed more bills than any of her Senate colleagues. And those are two significant pieces to argue that she is highly qualified. I think she came to the attention of a lot of Americans during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings when she questioned him about his drinking. Popular three-term senator from Minnesota. She often uses rhetoric that includes stories from middle-class people, including her own family. As one of two daughters, raised by a school teacher and a newspaper reporter, she often references stories from her own life, the lives of her constituents, including her father's struggle and eventual triumph over alcoholism. She embarked on her presidential race during a snowstorm. You see her there doing that. And she's pragmatic, she's moderate. But there was one big piece of press that came out before some people even knew who she was that I think dragged her down a lot in the eyes of a lot of people. Even like smart people I know said, oh, but I heard she's really mean. I'm like, oh. Okay, so HuffPost and some other pretty major news outlets ran a story, including the New York Times, that described her dealing with her staff in a way that is tough. You know, the story of her salad where the fork was missing and she used a washed comb and was ranting and raving about how her staff doesn't do things right and that they're making her look bad and they're laughing at us, is a well-worn story. And I would argue that this is a gender problem too. I mean, I don't know Bernie Sanders, but just from his style of speaking, I could definitely picture him throwing things in anger. He seems angry when he's not even talking about angry things. He's yelling. And yet I don't even remember ever seeing a story about that. But I think it stuck to Amy Klobuchar, and I think it was a problem for her. Now, as someone who loves to write books about women running for political office, I always try to get interviews. In fact, I just got turned down. I'm trying to update my children's book on the women of the Supreme Court, and we haven't added Amy Coney Barrett to the book. And I wrote a lovely letter inviting her for an interview, and she said, just too busy right now, but is delighted to be included. Well, that's nice. So we are definitely going to include her. She is a Supreme Court justice. Marianne Williamson did give me an interview, and I was thrilled to have it because Marianne Williamson ran for president of the United States in 2020. She's a California woman, American author, a lecturer, and activist. And being very honest, I never heard of her before she ran for president. And that's another point I want to make. Running for president helps make you famous. It sounds like a keen grasp of the obvious, but just ask Andrew Yang. You know, I didn't know who he was either, and then he ran for the mayorship of New York, and running for president gives you a bump in terms of helping people know who you are. And if you are a woman, that's enormously helpful. The other point I'd like to make is that I think sometimes people run for president not necessarily knowing that they're going to win, but that they want to, they might earnestly believe that they are, but maybe deep in their hearts they realize they probably won't, but that it will help them create a national conversation around the issues that they care about. In the case of Marianne Williamson, however, she was very much accused of running for president to sell books. And that happened on The View. I can't remember which one of The View women said to her, come on, are you just running for president so you could sell some books? Very insulting, right? I don't think I've ever had a man running for president asked that question. Anderson Cooper on CNN asked her when she appeared on his show who she was planning to support. And she said, I'm running. So that's a very insulting question for someone who's running for president. This is the Vogue photo cover shoot featuring women running for president. And who's missing? Marianne Williamson. They kept her off of it, and they said the reason was that we were featuring women who have held political office, while at the same time, a man was leading our country who had never held political office. So I feel like the press did mistreat her, and in my interview with her, she felt very much the same way. But let's get to her rhetoric a little bit. Anyone who was a fan of Robert Kennedy's style of speaking would appreciate Marianne Williamson's style of speaking, because Marianne Williamson often spoke in a way that, in my mind, was reminiscent of Robert Kennedy. And I'll give you a little excerpt from that. Williamson's public speaking has been consistent because she unfailingly took her life coaching approach to heal the country's ailments. She treated the country like a body that's sick. And she was able to make a complete holistic parallel between healing people over the years and prescribing a healing approach to the United States. She wrote her own speeches, she often committed them to memory, and she delivered them in a rhythmic, assured style. And so I'll give you a little clip of something that she said while she was running for president, because I actually really enjoyed her speeches. We need more than new policies. We need a new worldview. We need to replace economic values with humanitarian values as an ordering principle. She said, too many Americans were numbing our pain with antidepressants. And she said, a politics of conscience is still possible. And yes, love will prevail. The day has come for an American reckoning. This is not a time to close our eyes, but to open them to the light within. It's a time of atonement, a time of replanting, a time of deliverance, or not. The choice is ours. In honor of our ancestors and in honor of our descendants, may we choose well, may we choose wisely, may we choose love. And so when I interviewed her, she said she felt very much made fun of for saying, love is the answer, essentially. But she did feel like that was her core message, and she was proud to put it out there because she felt that there was so much hatred in the country that the only thing that's going to shift the way the country feels is through just radical love. That was her feeling. So I always like to end by saying, we're inching forward, and these are our three women who have been vice presidential candidates. And maybe my hypothesis is that we will elect a woman president through the vice presidency. And Vice President Harris has been given substantial work to do as the vice president. She has asked President Biden for a seat at the table. I do think that seat at the table is important, just like he had one with Barack Obama. We have the first woman who is the vice president, but I don't think she will be the last. And I do think she has changed presidential politics in the United States forever. She's the first woman to serve as vice president. She has proven that when women run, women win. Perhaps not the office that they're seeking at the time, but they may win in a way that inches forward, Madam President, in the future more dramatically than any woman who has run for president previously. And then someone sent me this little pin. I was trying to find it to wear it today. I couldn't find it. I must have put it somewhere special because I love it. And I'm on Instagram if you'd like to follow me. I post a lot about women running for office and my cats. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Gutgold. This has been such a stimulating talk, and it's brought back so many recollections of the 2020 presidential race that I almost forgot that there was a pandemic. This focus. So we'll take questions here, and just so everyone knows, if you can come up here, we'll do them. That's how we have to do it because we're taping this. And I'll start with the first one, which is, you mentioned that Senator Warren has kind of been out of the public eye since, not since she dropped out of the race or suspended her campaign in March of 2020, but since the Biden presidency started. It seems to me in some ways that Vice President Harris has been largely behind the scenes, that we haven't seen very much of the vice president in the news. Obviously has been tasked with responsibilities, the border crisis comes to mind, and so forth. But do you think that, is that a strategy? Is some of the energy that Kamala Harris brought to the presidential campaign potentially taking away from, is that seen as potentially taking away from visibility to the Biden presidency? I'm just curious as to your thoughts about now, as we're moving into 1 year past the election, what Vice President Harris's role is in this White House and why it appears to be behind the scenes.
What a good question. Yeah. I was happy to hear that she got difficult assignments. And I wrote a short piece for the Women's Media Center saying that, thinking that I think of her role as vice president as any of us think about our jobs as employees. We feel great when our boss taps us on the shoulder and says, can you do this? And it's something hard and, could potentially go wrong. But I think she definitely must navigate that tricky terrain of being the vice president. And help me here, political scientists in the room. My observation is that historically, vice presidents have gone to funerals and they were very much behind the scenes. But Dick Cheney, I would say Joe Biden, I don't know about Pence. I'm a little less familiar with, I thought he was a pretty active vice president. It seems like the modern vice presidency is more visible. And yet, Dr. Bose's observation is that she's not really as visible. And I would worry if that's the truth, because I think more visibility is better for her. So I hope it's not some strategic insecurity on the part of the Biden administration to keep her from getting attention that might take away from his leadership profile. I hope that's not the case, because I think that her political future will bode better if she's more visible, if she has more leadership opportunities. So I'm not sure the reason why we're not seeing as much of her. The campaign was totally weird because of COVID. there was like a drive-through thing in my town, and the best you could do was sit in your car and see an image of Harris up on the screen. But now that, the Delta variant seems to be receding, maybe this is when we're going to see more of her. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm hoping we do, because I think it's how we will elect a president, by a very active vice president who looks like, like she could say, I've been in the Situation Room, or I've been in these places that are, important, and I've made many strategic decisions that have helped X, that have saved X, Y, and Z. I think that's really important to leadership. Other thoughts from the political scientists about, is she less visible than, say, Joe Biden was in the Obama administration? Yes. Okay. It's funny, I saw that. I've been on a bit of a sabbatical from cable news myself the past, 2 months. I just decided I had enough. And so the guilty pleasure at the hotel yesterday, I was like, ooh, I'm going to turn it on. So I watched a little CNN and I watched a little Fox, and I saw the clip on Fox where they were saying, oh, do you hear her? Oh my goodness. They were really making fun of her communication style. But it's hard to sound dignified talking about the planets to children. I mean, you're reading a children's book. So there's that. But that was a great question. I guess, one of the things I want to start to do is start to study her more, to see, is her rhetoric helping to create an ethos that is presidential? Because if anyone has an opportunity to do that, it's her, because she's there as the vice president. Any other questions? Yes, oh, good. Yeah.
Hello,
Hello.
my name is Crystal. So I had a quick question.
Sure.
Women are already, in a sense, questioned of their ability to run these positions of leadership. But I wanted to talk specifically about women of minority backgrounds. How do we change the narrative of these women being, quote unquote, the other, where women such as Tulsi, as you mentioned, come from Hawaii, had that experience serving for our country, but their backgrounds aren't as familiar to other Americans who are in other parts of the states?
That's a brilliant question, Crystal. I think Tulsi helps us. I think Tulsi's bid for the presidency helps us. I think it shows anyone, that can identify with her, you can do it, and I think that a good friend of mine is the CEO of the Asian Chamber of Commerce in Philadelphia. And really the aim of that organization is to help to amplify the voices of the Asian community in the Philadelphia area. And I think that whenever we have someone run, Andrew Yang, I'll give you a quick example. I know Andrew Yang is a man, but he's also Chinese. I taught for a university in Chinese, and I was talking about the US presidency, and so many students is like, you have Andrew Yang running. You see, Crystal, that when people identify, when they can see themselves in the person that's running, it excites them, because they say, this is like the first person running that looks like me, and I think Kamala Harris has been talking about that a lot with young children. There's a couple children's books that have come out. And I think, so your question is, how can these people break through the bias of, oh, but they're not like the typical person? I think they do it simply by running and saying, I can run. Like Shirley Chisholm, she actually said after she ran, she didn't say while she was in the campaign, she said, I didn't run to get in, I ran to be in. Because she said, I wanted to show that I'm over 35, I'm American born, and I can be the president, I can run. And so I think running. I think we need more women running in the next election. Like, this can't be the end of this big group. We need to have to write another book. You know, we need to have to continue to document these stories because that's how we will elect a woman president. But I would have a hard time believing Tulsi Gabbard won't be back in the national spotlight because she isn't even 40 years old yet. She has a long political future. And I've never run for political office, but I would imagine that when you get a taste of that national political office feeling, when you know, are in that race, it must give you like a little bit of a fever to want to do it again. I mean, how many times did Joe Biden run for president before he became president? So we need to, maybe you need to write her a letter and say, I hope you'll run again because your campaign is important to women, because we want you to be successful so we can see ourselves in you. So I think we should encourage that, right? So great question. Yes.
Oh, perfect. So my follow-up would be, when we focus so much on that person's backgrounds, and the first person I come to think of right now is former President Donald Trump. When we look at his resume, had no political affiliation, it was more just business. How can we then, for those same women who do have experience in politics, whether they were a governor or a legislator or a representative, how do we then differentiate the, not necessarily the resume, but the qualifications and how that puts them in better standings?
Well, that is a great question. My advice would be what a lot of the women do, and that is like Elizabeth Warren. She split her talking between her resume and her ability to understand economic realities for the middle class and her desire to fix the middle class. She disclosed a part of her resume. And I think that for women candidates, that's essential, to be able to stand up there and say, you know, as a congresswoman in Hawaii and as a military veteran, as she did, I saw firsthand the ravages of war. And I can bring that leadership to my position as president. I think she did it. I thought she was a very effective spokesperson for herself. And I think that I don't know why she didn't do better. I think there are just so many variables why a person isn't more successful. And hopefully she'll be back to make her case again. But I think definitely disclosing a part of that resume is a good idea, especially for women. And we saw Joe Biden do that too. Oh, when Barack asked me to do X, or, you know, he threw around a lot that he was, you know, I remember Al Gore saying, I was in the Situation Room, I was there, you know, and I remember thinking, ooh, the Situation Room, I need one of those, you know, but I remember thinking like, that's pretty compelling to be in that Situation Room, you know, and so I think Tulsi Gabbard can really speak to that, especially, you know, maybe her time will come again because of this, what happened in Afghanistan. Maybe sooner than we think, we'll be looking for leaders who understand the ravages of war and how to be more careful about the human consequences that we have to pay. So we'll see.
Well, thank you so much for your
response.
response.
Thank you for asking. I love questions. Anyone else with a question? Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, we have two coming up. We have, yeah, that'd be great.
So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the obstacles when women run. And I'm thinking of two things. One is in 2008, at the end of the 2008 race, Rebecca Traister wrote a book, Big Girls Don't Cry, talking about Hillary Clinton's run, and talked about the men who came to her rallies who would shout out things like "Iron my shirt."
Make me a sandwich.
2008, yeah.
Yeah.
But then more recently, when Kamala Harris was in the race and other women, the polling that indicated that while people in theory thought women were fine, they didn't like their voice. They'd list qualities that they didn't care for about them, that of all women, that they didn't like, not their particular candidate that they might be supporting, but that those were the reservations they had about women in general, which made it less likely when push came to shove that they'd vote for a woman.
Brilliant question. Thank you for asking it. All the obstacles are everything you just said. I think there is a lot of sexism and misogyny that is still very rampant in our country. I think there is a lot of bias against women in power, women in leadership. And I think that the model of what the American presidency has always looked like has been male. Out of central casting came Ronald Reagan. And I think we still think of him as, sort of what the president looks like. That all being said, I think that the way we diminish that stereotyping is through more critical mass of women running that will just change the paradigm of what the president looks like. And we are seeing it in other areas, which I do think is helpful for the presidency. For example, where I live in the Lehigh Valley, we have 6 or 7 colleges, and I think all but 2 are led by women. Your Hofstra University is led by a woman. We used to think that the governorship was the key to the presidency, but we no longer necessarily think that after Barack Obama won the presidency. So the Senate is definitely a place where we can still draw from viable candidates. But I think just more women running is going to slowly just shoot down all those bad obstacles. But everything from how can I run for the president when I have to worry about getting my kid to daycare? That's like a real practical thing. A lot of women put on hold bigger aspirations because practically they can't do it. And so when we see more young women with young children in the Congress and in the Senate, and when we see more infrastructure for universal preschool and other supports for families, then I think we are going to see more women who are leaders, and leaders want to lead, running. And being successful at that. But it's not a small thing. There will always be, like there was the hidden Trump voter, there's the hidden not voting for a woman voter, I think. You don't want to admit it, but you get into that voting booth and you say, I don't know. I'm just going to vote for the guy. I think there is that. And how we uncover it, I don't know. But I do think there's still a misconception about what women can do, but we're inching it away. I do think in the 20 years I've been doing this, I have seen improvement in not only the coverage of women, but the number of women and the varying types of women. It used to be only one kind of woman would win, or what I would read is that a Republican woman will be president first because we'll be able to accept sort of this straight-laced kind of woman more readily than we would a liberal woman. I don't think that's true anymore. And there was another question. Yeah.
Assuming that Biden doesn't run in 24, or maybe 4 years later, Harris, as we've suggested, would be in a position to be a natural successor. One of the things that worries me or disturbs me is that she's been the subject of incessant attacks by the right and even by the center. And this isn't my opinion necessarily, but things like, she was appointed border czar, but she hasn't been at the border. She hasn't been visible enough. She's less than competent. Again, not my opinion.
Right, of course.
But you hear this enough, and it becomes absorbed into the body politique. How do you think that this impacts a possible run?
I think it impacts it a lot. And I'm even still concerned about the image of her while she was a presidential candidate that was a little cavalier. When she was on Charlemagne de God's radio program and she laughed about using marijuana, I think those are the kind of things that will hurt her. So I don't think she's a shoo-in. And, Dr. Bose reminded me as we were walking over here, she goes, do you remember when during the primary it looked like Joe Biden was just done, at one point? And what did they say? A week is a lifetime in politics. We're just going to have to wait to see how she shapes herself rhetorically and how we receive her as the weeks go and months and years go by. And I'd love a political scientist's opinion on this, whether or not Joe Biden will seek re-election. I wonder about that. Does anyone have a guess or an educated opinion? Because I thought he said he was only going to serve one term. He said he's going to run, so he will run again. So, presumably he would keep Harris as his running mate. And then her time wouldn't be until 2028 to really run. So, okay, yeah. Yeah. Initially, though, during the campaign, he said, if elected, I would only serve one term. Do you remember that? No, he didn't say that? Oh, okay. He said he would definitely choose a woman. Okay, I'm wrong. I thought maybe I dreamed it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Because of his age. They thought like that would be better. But now that he's in, he would like to run again. Yeah. Yeah. So any other questions? Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, for your stimulating questions, and just for being a fantastic audience. Thank you for Hofstra, for Dr. Bose, and everyone who helped put this together. It was like, I'm going to think about this for a long time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Guthart, for sharing your expertise with us. Thanks, everyone. I can't turn around and look at all, but there are attendance sheets there, so if your professors want you to sign up, just kind of do that. I think I've kind of eyeballed my whole class, but just to make sure. And everyone have a wonderful fall break. You've earned it. We're halfway there, okay? All right, we'll hope to see you in a few weeks, several of these classes again. Thank you.